The marble under your feet is cold. It shouldn't be. Outside, Istanbul is burning under an August sun that turns the Bosphorus into a mirror of molten silver. But here, in this inner courtyard surrounded by walls you don't recognize, the white marble floor absorbs the heat as though it was designed to remind you that you've entered a place where the seasons no longer matter. You are 13. Or 14. You're not entirely sure anymore because no one has asked in weeks, and the days on the ship blurred into the days at the market, and the days traveling here in a way that makes time feel like something that belongs to someone else. The smell is what disorients you most. Where you grew up, in the mountains of Circassia, the air smelled like pine and damp earth after rain. This place smells like roses and cedarwood, and something that takes you days to identify. It's the accumulated scent of hundreds of women living in the same enclosed space, all of them perfumed to the point of dizziness, with nowhere to go. A woman around 50, her hair covered, her eyes belonging to someone who stopped being surprised by anything decades ago, approaches and speaks to you in a Turkish you barely understand. She doesn't ask your name. She doesn't explain where you are. She simply gestures for you to follow, and you follow. Because you've already learned, in these weeks of transit between one world and another, that following is the only thing you can do. Music. This is the Harem-i Homayun, the imperial harem. The forbidden heart of Topkapi Palace, built in the 16th century, on a hill overlooking the exact point where the Bosphorus meets the Golden Horn. From certain barred windows, you can see the water. You can never touch it. The word harem comes from the Arabic haram, the sacred, the forbidden, both at once. A sanctuary and a prison sharing the exact same walls. There are more than 400 rooms here. Courtyards connected by covered hallways, fountains that run day and night, interior gardens where sunlight filters through carved wooden lattices. In this year, at this moment in your life, more than 800 women live inside these walls. 800. Most of them will never be summoned by the Sultan. Most of them will grow old and die within these walls without anyone, outside of themselves, noticing exactly when it happened. You don't yet know that you will be one of them. What you do know, what you understand in the first hours, is that you no longer have a name. Yours, the one your parents gave you, the one you used in the mountains, no longer works here. Not because it's forbidden, but because no one is going to use it. The woman who guides you calls you Asemi, which means novice, beginner, someone who still doesn't know anything. It's a description, not a name. And for now, it's all you are. Music. The process of becoming what this place needs you to be takes exactly 2 years. 2 years during which you never leave this complex. 2 years in which you learn Turkish, Arabic, and Persian. In which you memorize the Quranic verses you're expected to know. In which an usta, a senior teacher with absolute authority over your time and body, teaches you how to walk in a specific way. Small steps, straight back, eyes never above the level of the person speaking to you if that person ranks above you in the hierarchy. Which means that in these first weeks, you almost always walk looking at the floor. They also teach you how to sit, how to bow, how to present an object with both hands, how to enter a room, and how to leave it. There is a right way to do each of these things and a wrong way, and the difference between them is not small. The wrong way can mean a reprimand, an added restriction, less food, or being assigned the heaviest chores in the courtyard for weeks. The chores. Because that is the first thing you are here. A servant. Not a concubine. Not a favorite. A carrier. A domestic slave. Assigned to clean, to serve, to carry, to tidy. The higher-ranking Odalisques. The ones who have been here for years. The ones who have already learned everything there is to learn. Watch you pass with an expression that isn't exactly contempt, but isn't compassion either. It's the quiet recognition of someone who was once where you are now and survived. The hammam, the Turkish bath, is mandatory every day. Not as a luxury, but as a discipline. The steam, the hot water, the complete removal of body hair. All of it is part of the process of turning you into something this place can use. There are women whose sole function in the harem is keeping the others beautiful. They learn to mix a paste of sugar and lemon for hair removal, to braid hair with gold thread, to apply kohl around the eyes with a precision that creates the illusion that they're larger than they are. Beauty here isn't an accident. It's a technology, and you are the raw material. Music. By the end of the first month, you understand the structure of the place where you live. At the top is the Valide Sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan. A woman who, herself, started exactly where you are now, in some slave market in some city she no longer clearly remembers, and who rose and had a son, and that son became the Padishah, the Lord of the universe, and now she is the most powerful person within these walls. No woman can enter or leave the harem without her explicit permission. Her power extends over matters of life and death. The eunuchs report directly to her. You don't see her for weeks. She lives in her own apartments, in the largest and most important section of the complex, surrounded by her own kalfas and servants. When she passes through a corridor, everyone bows. You learn to bow before anyone has to remind you. Below the Valide Sultan are the Qadins, the Sultan's official wives, up to 4 under Islamic law. Each with her own rooms, her own income, her own retinue of servants. The Qadins who have given the Sultan a male child hold a position that is almost untouchable. Their sons are potential heirs to the throne. What that means in terms of power and danger is something you'll understand much later. Below the Qadins are the Iqbals, the fortunate ones. Women who have shared the Sultan's bed at least once. If that night produced a son, they ascended. If not, they remained on that middle rung. More than most, less than the wives, waiting. And below the Iqbals are the Guzde, the favorites. Women who have caught the Sultan's eye, who he has noticed, who have received a signal that they are visible to him. Holding that status is like standing on the edge of a cliff looking down. You can fall into oblivion, or you can rise. It depends on one night, on one gesture, on whether the Sultan sleeps well or badly that week. And then there's you, the Carrier, the Assemi, the Odalisque at the lowest rung of a hierarchy with 8 levels. Not because you're unattractive, quite the opposite. You're here precisely because you're beautiful. Circassian and Georgian women carry a reputation throughout the Ottoman Empire that precedes their arrival. The clarity of their skin, the symmetry of their features, their light-colored eyes that are a rarity in these latitudes. Those were the first things the buyer noticed at the market. Those are the reasons you're here and not somewhere else. But beauty alone opens no doors in the Harem-i Humayun. Beauty is the price of admission. What happens after you get in depends on other things. Music. The day begins before dawn. The Fajr call to prayer sounds when the sky over the Bosphorus is still black. The women rise, wash, pray. There's no choice. Faith here is not a private matter. It's a requirement of the system, and the system makes sure it's followed. After prayer, breakfast. Bread, olives, white cheese, tea. The portions are calibrated. Enough to sustain the body without enlarging it, because the system has its own standards about how the bodies it contains should look. Too thin, and you're fragile. Too heavy, and you lose prospects. The exact point between those two extremes is a line the ustas monitor with the same attention they give to everything else. The first hours of the morning are for classes. Turkish, if you're still learning it. Quranic Arabic. Calligraphy, because a woman who can write is worth more than one who can't. Embroidery, not a hobby, but a skill that can take years to master, producing the dresses and tapestries that adorn the palace's most important rooms. Music, the lute, the oud, its strings vibrating in your chest. The reed flute, the ney, its sound carrying something between prayer and lament that no one explains to you, but that everyone understands. The qanun, a stringed instrument that requires both hands to do completely different things at the same time. You practice the lute for 4 hours a day for 16 months before anyone tells you that you have something resembling talent. The afternoons are for chores, cleaning, serving, attending to higher-ranking women in their daily needs, carrying hot water for the hammam, folding clothes, making beds, combing someone else's hair. There's something about this last gesture, the repeated act of drawing an ivory comb through hair that belongs to someone more important than you, that produces a strange mental state. Not exactly peace, not exactly despair. Something in between that has no name in any of the languages you're learning. At nightfall, after the Isha prayer, the oil lamps are extinguished in the communal dormitories where the lower-ranking Odalisques sleep. 30, 40 women in the same room. The sound of other people breathing. The warmth of bodies that fills the space even in winter. And at some point during the first weeks, when the full silence of the night arrives and everyone is asleep, a eunuch quietly opens the door to the room and stands there listening. He's checking to see if anyone snores. This isn't a joke. There are historical records of Odalisques who were sent back to the slave market, or whose price was renegotiated downward because they snored. The Harem-i-Humayun has standards for everything, even for how women sound while they sleep. You learn to sleep in silence. Music. The eunuchs are the other half of the harem. No one talks about them exactly, but they're everywhere. The white eunuchs, brought mainly from Bosnia and Christian Europe, handle external administration. The black eunuchs, brought from Ethiopia and the regions of Lake Chad, subjected to a more radical castration that removes not only reproductive capacity, but sometimes any possibility of physical pleasure, are the only men allowed inside the harem. They are the guards, the intermediaries, the only channels of communication between the world inside and the world outside. At the top of all of them is the Qızlar, the chief of the black eunuchs. His title literally means chief of the girls, which gives an exact sense of how the system conceptualizes the women it contains. The Qızlar is the third highest ranking official in the Ottoman Empire, after the Sultan and the Grand Vizier. He holds the rank of three-tailed Pasha. He organizes all ceremonies within the harem: weddings, circumcisions, births, celebrations. He oversees promotions. He passes sentences. He also oversees executions. When a woman in the harem is accused of a serious offense, treason, political scheming, infidelity, it is the Kızlarası who delivers the verdict. And the verdict, in the most severe cases, means being sewn inside a leather sack and thrown into the Bosphorus, whose cold, dark waters lie less than 2 miles from the palace. No one inside the harem speaks of this, but everyone knows it. You learn it in your 3rd month, from a gesture a veteran Kalfa makes when another Odalisque asks a question she shouldn't have asked. A small, almost imperceptible gesture toward the water visible from the barred windows. It's enough. You never again ask questions that shouldn't be asked. Music. The years inside the harem move with a specific kind of slowness. They aren't measured in months or seasons. They're measured in sultans, in the births of princes, in changes of Valide Sultan, in fires that force entire sections of the palace to be rebuilt, and that blend the smell of charred wood with the smell of roses for weeks. By the end of your 2nd year, you speak Turkish fluently. Your Quranic Arabic is correct. You play the lute in a way that makes other women stop to listen. You've learned to walk the way you're supposed to walk, to bow at the correct angle depending on who's in front of you. 15 degrees for a Kalfa, 30 for an Usta, 60 for the Kadins. And if you ever found yourself before the Valide Sultan, your forehead would need to nearly touch the floor. You have become a functional Odalisque, which means that now, in theory, you could be presented to the Sultan. The word could carries a trap inside it. The Odalisques who are presented to the Sultan are only the most exceptional. Those who combine remarkable beauty with documented artistic talent and years of impeccable behavior. The rest, the majority, remain as they are. Luxury servants in the largest harem in the world, invisible to the man they legally belong to. You don't know at this moment in your life which of those groups you belong to. That is no longer your decision. Music. The Valide Sultan sees you for the first time on an afternoon in October. Not because you did anything extraordinary. It happens because you were in the courtyard practicing the lute while the October sun turned the light golden and slanted, and someone in the Valide Sultan's entourage heard the music from a corridor and stopped the procession. The Valide Sultan is a woman in her 60s with a posture that seems carved from stone. She looks at you for approximately 30 seconds. She says nothing. One of her attendants writes something in a small book. The procession moves on. That's all. But the next day, your usta calls you aside and tells you that you've been moved to a different level of instruction. That you'll now be learning additional things. That certain people have noticed your progress. There's something in her tone that isn't exactly joy. Something more neutral than that. Like someone delivering information that could mean anything. You'll understand it later. The additional lessons include the arts of love. Not in explicit terms, but coded in gestures, in postures, in ways of moving that communicate availability and sophistication simultaneously. There are women whose function within the harem is to teach exactly this. They do so with the same pedagogical seriousness as those who teach music or calligraphy. The body as an instrument. Pleasure as technique. Seduction as a language that can be learned like any other. You spend 6 more months in this advanced instruction. At the end of those 6 months, you are a gedikli, a personal servant of senior rank. Technically, this puts you within the Sultan's field of vision. Technically, you are now a candidate to be presented. The word technically carries its own trap too. Music. The night they call you is a Thursday night. There's not much warning. A Kalfa arrives at the dormitory in mid-afternoon and says your name, the new Turkish name they gave you when you entered the harem, and asks you to follow her. Other women in the room watch you. Their expressions are complicated. There's something in them that isn't exactly envy, because envy requires the desired object to be clearly desirable. And everyone in that room knows that what awaits you can mean many different things. They take you to the special hammam. Not the communal hammam of every day, but a separate room with turquoise and gold mosaics, water scented with jasmine oil, specialized women who work on your body with clinical, completely impersonal efficiency, hair removal, moisturizing, your hair washed, dried, combed, braided with silk thread, kohl applied around your eyes, your hands painted with henna in patterns that take hours to complete. They dress you in clothes you've never touched before. Silk and embroidery, colors ranging from sapphire blue to seafoam green, overlapping layers of fabrics so fine they barely have weight. Around your waist, they tie a strand of pearls. Not at your neck, at your waist. It's the symbol of your virginity. The Sultan is the only one who can break it. The entire process takes 4 hours. At the end, one of the women brings you a silver mirror. You look at yourself. The person you see is beautiful in a way that doesn't feel entirely yours, built by other hands for a specific purpose that has nothing to do with you. The Kızlarası himself leads you down a hallway you haven't walked before. His footsteps make no sound. Neither do yours. The only instruction your usta gave you for this night is to remember everything you've learned, and not to look the Sultan directly in the eyes until he signals that you may. What happens after that night determines the rest of your life inside the harem. Music. In the 16th century, a woman named Roxolana, who had also arrived at the harem as a Circassian slave, turned one night with Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent into 38 years of documented love. She wrote him letters. He wrote her poems. He married her, breaking a 200-year tradition. She became the Haseki Sultan, the official consort, and from that position, she influenced foreign policy decisions of the most powerful empire in the world. Her real name was probably Anastasia or Alexandra. The name they gave her when she entered the harem was Hürrem, meaning the joyful one. She died in that palace decades later as the most powerful woman of her time. You don't know this story when you walk into that room. You also don't know that stories like Hürrem's are the exception the system uses to justify itself, to make every new Odalisque who arrives believe she has a chance. That if she's beautiful enough, talented enough, strategic enough, she could be the next Hürrem. What the system doesn't tell you is how many women came before her and after her and were never called even once. How many practiced the lute for 4 hours a day for years in communal dormitories where no one listened except other women who were also practicing the lute for 4 hours a day. How many grew old within these walls without anything changing for them? You'll understand that later. Much later. Music. The morning after that night, your rank changes. You are now a Gözde, the favorite. The one who is in the Sultan's eye, which is the literal translation of the title. You have a room of your own for the first time since you entered the harem. Small, with a barred window overlooking an inner courtyard where a pomegranate tree grows. Nobody tends to it particularly, but it keeps producing fruit. You have your own monthly allowance. 2 kalfas are assigned to your service. The change is real. The difference between sleeping with 40 women in a room and having a room of your own is the difference between being invisible and being something. Anything. Something. And the hope you feel in those first weeks as a gözde is, of all the moments of your life in the harem, the most dangerous. Because hope has its own logic. If I was called once, I can be called again. If I'm a gözde, I can become an iqbal. If I become an iqbal and get pregnant, I can become a haseki. If my child survives, and if that child is a boy, and if that boy someday becomes sultan, I could be the next Valide Sultan, the most powerful woman in the world. The logic is perfect. The odds are something else entirely. Music, the months pass. You are not called again. It isn't unusual. The Sultan has hundreds of women in the harem. His priorities are geopolitical, military, dynastic. He doesn't always have time for the harem. He doesn't always have the mental space. There are nights he visits an established Kadin, nights he visits no one. Entire weeks when he's away on military campaign, and the harem runs as it always runs, like a mechanism that doesn't require the Sultan's presence to keep turning. You wait. You practice the lute. You embroider. You learn to make lokum, the sweet made from sugar and starch served at ceremonies. Because you need to do something with your hours and your hands, and the system always has a task available for those with time to spare. The other gözde look at you the way you once looked at the gözde when you were a kariye. There's a calculation in that look that no one puts into words, but everyone understands. How long before they're called again? How long before the Sultan forgets them? Where exactly the line falls between being a gözde and becoming one of the forgotten women. The term historians will use centuries later, when they need a name for the harem women who left no documented history because the system didn't consider their lives important enough to record. How many months exactly before the private room and the kalfas and the monthly allowance become nothing more than the frame around a life no one will remember? You don't know the answer. The system doesn't tell you either. The system doesn't need you to know. Music. 1 year after your night with the Sultan, the Valide Sultan dies. It happens in spring, from an illness no one names precisely inside the harem, though rumors speculate on several possibilities. Her death reshuffles everything. A new Valide Sultan takes her place. The mother of the reigning Sultan is no longer the same woman as when you entered the harem, because the Sultan himself changed. There was a succession you didn't fully understand, because successions in the Ottoman Empire are bloody and complicated affairs that sometimes include the systematic elimination of the new Sultan's brothers, which produces inside the harem a specific kind of silence. The silence of women who lost their sons and cannot mourn them out loud, because grief in this place has its own rules too. The new Valide Sultan has her own favorites, her own alliances, her own internal map of who is who in this labyrinth of 400 rooms. You are not on that map. When 3 years pass since your night with the Sultan, and you have not been called again, when the new Sultan barely knows your name because you are one gözde among dozens, and time dilutes the memory of specific nights, you begin to understand something. The understanding doesn't arrive all at once. There's no dramatic moment, no revelation that changes everything in an instant. It's more of an accumulation, the accumulation of identical mornings. identical afternoons, identical nights. The quiet realization that the system you belong to looks exactly the same today as it did 3 years ago, and will probably look exactly the same 3 years from now, regardless of what you do or don't do. And that is the understanding that arrives without noise, that your beauty, the reason you are here, is not enough, that your music, which you spent years learning, is not enough, that the night you slept with the Sultan, which seemed to open a door, really only moved you from one locked room to another locked room with a window overlooking the courtyard of the pomegranate tree, that the system didn't fail. The system worked exactly as it was supposed to. Music. There are women in the harem who have been here for 20 years, 30. You see them in the hallways, in the hammam, in the inner gardens. Women whose beauty no longer exists in the same way it did when they arrived, because beauty under these conditions is temporary, and the harem is permanent.
Women who hold administrative positions because the system needs administrators, and they've been here long enough to know how everything works. Kalfas who supervise the asimis. Ustas who teach music or embroidery or protocol. Women who found their usefulness inside the machinery and became part of it. And then there are the others. Those who didn't find that administrative usefulness. Those who are simply bodies the system contains because there's no mechanism to expel them. Technically, there is one way out. After 9 years of service without being named an official wife, an Odalisque can be freed from the harem. The Sultan pays for her marriage. He gives her a dowry. He arranges her marriage to some minor state official, some second-rank officer willing to marry a former harem slave, because that too carries its own advantages within the empire's system of privilege. 9 years. And the freedom waiting at the end of those 9 years isn't exactly freedom. It's an exchange of one system for another system. You still belong to the empire. You're still someone's wife. You're still living inside rules written by someone else. But there is a window, a door, an outside, and some women choose it. You are 4 years in when you understand that not all women do. That some prefer to stay. Not because the harem is better than the outside, but because the harem is all they know. And the outside is an abstraction they've learned not to want too much. Because wanting what you can't have within these walls produces a kind of pain the system doesn't need, and that you can't afford. The system doesn't need you to be happy. It only needs you to exist. Music. The years pass. You turn 18, then 20, then an age you no longer count with the same urgency as before. You become a Kalfa. Not for having reached the top of the female hierarchy. Not for having had a son by the Sultan. But because you've been here long enough, because you know the system well enough, because you are reliable and competent, and the harem needs Kalfas who know what they're doing. Your name is now spoken by new asimis in the same tone you once used to say the names of the Kalfas when you arrived. Like someone who knows. Like someone who has been here longer than you can imagine. Like someone who belongs to this place. Not as a prisoner. Not exactly. As part of the machinery. And there is a morning, specifically a March morning, with the smell of the Bosphorus drifting softly through the lattice of your window, when you see a new girl arrive. She is 13 or 14. The dark hair and light eyes of the Circassians. She looks around with the expression of someone still trying to figure out how different this place is from everything she's ever known. The woman guiding her through the courtyard, gesturing for her to follow, not asking her name because names don't work here yet, is you? You look at her, and in her expression, in that specific movement of the eyes as she tries to calculate the size of the space where she's going to live, you recognize something you hadn't seen in a very long time. You recognize yourself, and the system, unhurried, unpausing, with no need for anyone to understand it in order to keep running, receives its new piece and continues. As always. As if it had never stopped. As if you, and her, and all who came before, and all who will come after, were interchangeable variables in an equation that has been producing the same result for centuries. The marble under her feet is cold. And the system continues.